Welcome to Nakora Nights. There's something different about Texas small towns. Something in the dust, in the heat, and in the way strangers stare just a little too long. You drive through one of these towns and swear you're the only outsider they've seen in months. Everyone knows everyone, and they all seem to know something you don't. Tonight, we unlock what really hides behind those quiet roads and sun-faded storefronts. These are 10 true Texas small-town horror stories. Stories from places so small, they barely appear on the map, but leave scars on the people who escape. The diner with a customer who never blinks. The house that still has lights on, even though the family went missing. And the sheriff who warned travelers not to stop, for any reason. These stories aren't rumors. They're confessions, from people who swore they'd never set foot in Texas again. But before we dive in, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it for you? Because in towns like these, things go wrong when the clock hits midnight. If you're ready to step into the dust, the dark, and the secrets Texas hides so well, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below. I'm not stopping in any small town again. Now, tighten your seatbelt, keep your eyes on the road, and whatever you do, don't pull over. This is 10 Untold Most Disturbing True Texas Small-Town Horror Stories. Let's begin. I never believed the woods around Houston could feel haunted. Not until that one autumn when everything changed. My name's Caleb Ford, and I grew up on the edge of a forgotten little town called Baywood, about 40 minutes east of Houston. It's one of those quiet, swampy places where the fog rolls off the marshes before dawn and the air smells like rain-soaked pine. Folks there don't rush much. They fish, hunt, fix their trucks, and drink coffee so black it tastes like the earth itself. I was one of them, born and raised under a sky that always seemed heavy, like it was holding a secret. I was 10 when I first held a rifle. My old man, Tom Ford, believed hunting was what made a person part of the land. He used to say the woods know who belongs and who doesn't. I remember the first morning he took me out, just before sunrise, the sky dim and bruised purple. I was small for my age, drowning in his old camo jacket that smelled like tobacco and oil. We hiked deep through wet grass and tall pines until the world went still. I could hear my own heart louder than the wind. I spotted the buck first, standing between two trees like it had been waiting for me. My hands shook when I aimed, but the shot rang out clean. The animal dropped, and my father's hand came down on my shoulder, rough and proud. "You did good, son." His breath puffed out little clouds in the cold air, and for a second, I thought that moment would live forever. Later that day, he wanted to try for one more. Said the light was still good, and his luck might hold. I followed, silent as always, carrying my small pack while he slung his rifle. We settled near the property line, close to an old rusted fence that marked where our land ended. Dad leaned against a fallen log, set his gun down, and within minutes he was snoring softly. I sat there, listening to the quiet, watching the breath rise from his mouth in faint wisps. That's when I saw him. A man was walking through the trees about 50 yards ahead, slow and deliberate, like he was counting every step. He wasn't dressed like a hunter. No orange vest, no rifle, just a long wool coat stained and torn over old overalls. His hat was wide-brimmed, and his beard was long and black as pitch. Even from a distance, I could tell his skin was pale. His movements were smooth, too smooth, and there was something about the way he looked around, as if the trees themselves were watching him. I whispered for my dad, but he didn't stir. The man never looked our way, just kept walking until he vanished between the pines. For a while, I told myself he was just a farmer, maybe lost. But deep down, I knew something about him didn't fit, like he'd stepped out of a picture too old for color. Years passed. Life got smaller. Dad's health went bad, and I started hunting alone. The woods didn't scare me anymore, though sometimes they felt lonelier than they used to. That fog still came down every morning, curling around the tree trunks like fingers. One November morning, I went back to the same spot, the one near that old fence line. Maybe it was nostalgia, or maybe I just wanted to feel like a kid again. The ground was soft from rain, and the air smelled like metal. The mist was so thick I could barely see more than 20 feet ahead. I was walking slow, eyes scanning for tracks, when my boot hit something solid. I stumbled forward, nearly dropping my rifle. When I turned to see what it was, I froze. It was a headstone, small, half sunk into the dirt, covered in moss. I knelt down, brushed away the mud, and read the faded words, "Unknown, deceased." No date, no name. Just that. The woods went quiet then. I mean, dead quiet. No birds, no frogs, no wind. The silence pressed on my ears until I could hear my heart beat. That's when I heard it, a slow, drawn-out creak, like rope tightening under weight. I turned. About 30 feet away, hanging from the limb of a pine, was a man. Same wide hat, same dark beard, same coat. His boots hung inches above the ground, swaying ever so slightly. His head tilted to one side, neck twisted at an angle that made my stomach roll. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. Then, his eyes opened. I ran. Branches tore at my jacket, thorns raked across my skin, but I didn't stop until I saw the yellow light of our porch lamp through the fog. I burst into the house, shaking so hard I could barely speak. Dad looked up from his recliner, his beer halfway to his mouth. "What the hell happened to you, boy?" I told him. The hanging man? The grave. The rope. The rope. His face went pale, but he didn't say much. Just grabbed his rifle, muttered, "Stay put," and stepped out the door. Minutes dragged on like hours. I sat on the porch, staring into the darkness until his boots crunched back up the gravel. He looked at me for a long time before saying, "Ain't no body out there, but there is a grave. You sure you weren't seeing things?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. He just went inside, quiet as a ghost. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's lifeless face, the way it swayed with the rhythm of something unseen. I could hear the creak of that rope in my dreams, soft and steady, like breathing. The next morning, I drove into town, to the Baywood Public Library. It's a small red brick building beside an empty gas station, the kind of place where the air smells like mold and paper. I asked the librarian, an old woman named Mrs. Dorsey, if she had any old newspapers from the area. She pointed me toward the back room where a dusty microfilm machine hummed in the dark. I spent hours scrolling through blurry headlines until I found one that made my hands go cold. July 12, 1943. Unidentified man found hanged near Baywood Creek. The article said the man's body had been discovered hanging from a pine on the old Miller property, our property now. No one claimed him. The coroner called it suicide. They buried him beneath the same tree. Next to the article was a black and white photograph. It was him. The same beard, same hat, same hollow eyes. When I looked up from the screen, the room felt smaller. Mrs. Dorsey must have noticed the color drain from my face. "You all right, son?" she asked. I swallowed hard and asked if she knew where the old Miller land had been. She frowned, thinking. "Out by the creek, past the fence line, I reckon." "Why?" "Because that's my land now," I whispered. A week later, I went back. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe, or guilt. The headstone was still there, the earth around it darker than before. The tree loomed over it, the same one I'd seen him hanging from. Except now, the branch was broken clean off, lying on the ground like it had been struck by lightning. Right above the headstone, carved deep into the bark, was a single word: forgive. The letters looked ancient, worn smooth by years of rain. I don't know what made me do it, but I whispered, "I'm sorry," before turning to leave. That night, just before sleep, I heard it again. That faint, drawn-out creak outside my window. I didn't look. I couldn't, and I never went hunting again. But that wasn't the end. 3 nights later, around 2:17 a.m., I woke to headlights flashing through my bedroom curtains. Someone had pulled up outside. I stepped to the window, but there was no truck, no car, just the reflection of my own face staring back. Then the reflection blinked. That's when the power cut. The house went dark except for a faint glow from the kitchen window. I crept down the hall, heart pounding. The smell hit first, wet soil and cedar. I flicked on my flashlight. the beam trembling over the floorboards. Every shadow felt alive. There was a shape standing at the back door. Hat, beard, coat. I whispered my dad's name, but he didn't answer. The figure didn't move, just tilted its head slightly. The light flickered, and when it came back, the space was empty. The door swung open on its own, letting the fog crawl in like breath. The next morning, I found footprints in the mud, boots, old ones, leading from the woods to our porch and stopping right beneath my window. A week later, I tried leaving Baywood for good. Packed my truck, sold the house, told myself the past couldn't follow asphalt. But as I drove through Houston's 5th Ward that night, I saw her, a woman standing under a streetlight, pale and still. She wasn't part of my story, but something about her felt wrong. Her eyes followed my truck. I turned the corner and saw her again, under the next light, same pose, same stare. By the 3rd one, I stopped looking. I checked into a cheap motel outside the city, just wanting sleep. The room smelled like mildew and old soap. When I woke the next morning, my toothbrush was wet and warm, like someone had just used it. I left that motel without brushing my teeth. I took the Metro Rail downtown later that day, hoping to drown my thoughts in noise. But halfway through the ride, I realized I wasn't alone. A man was sitting across from me, staring blankly out the window. When I looked at the reflection, I saw him sitting right next to me instead. I turned my head, and the seat beside me was empty. That night, I drove back toward Baywood, against every instinct I had left. The highway was dark, the fog thick as smoke. By the time I reached the old property, my hands were shaking. I parked by the fence and stepped out. The air was dead still, not even the sound of crickets. The grave was waiting. The trees still scarred. And on the dirt carved with a blade were new words. You came back. I dropped my light. It flickered, and in that strobe of dim yellow I saw him, standing right behind the headstone, rope still around his neck, eyes empty but fixed on me. I wanted to run. But his voice came out before my legs could move. You did good, son. It was my father's voice. The world tilted, the sound of creaking rope filling the air again. Slow, deliberate, endless. The smell of wet cedar pressed against my face. When I woke, the sun was up. The grave was gone, the tree too. Only my truck sat there, covered in dust, like it hadn't moved in years. I left Baywood that day. Haven't gone back. But sometimes, when the wind blows through Houston just right, I swear I can hear the soft creak of rope over the traffic. And I still see that man in reflections that shouldn't exist. I was 13 when I first realized something was wrong in the town I grew up in, a quiet patch of nowhere about 40 minutes east of Dallas. Folks called it Mason Creek, a name that sounded peaceful, like it belonged on postcards. But peace was a lie. Even back then, in the early 90s, I could feel something unsettled crawling beneath the surface, something that didn't want to be found. My name's Max Wells, and for most of my life, I've tried to forget Mason Creek. I work now as a field repair tech, fixing vending machines around Dallas, driving from one forgotten gas station to another. But lately, every time I drive past the woods near the old Mason Creek turnoff, I feel that same tightness in my chest I used to feel as a kid, because the truth is, that place never really let me go. When I was little, people in town told stories to keep kids close to home after dark. Every small town's got its monster, right? Ours was called the Splitter. Everything changed the summer I turned 13. The first person to go missing was a girl named Laura Briggs. She was 15, pretty, always wore denim jackets covered in band patches, and carried her Walkman everywhere. One night she was supposed to walk home after hanging out by the creek, but she never made it. The next morning, her backpack was found hanging on a fence near the woods. The sheriff said she probably ran off to Dallas. Everyone wanted to believe that. Then another kid disappeared, a boy named Jesse. Then another, a girl named Molly. The whole town started to panic. For the first time in my life, I saw grown men locking their doors and mothers holding their kids close when the sun dipped below the trees. It was around that time my best friend Travis told me something I'll never forget. We were sitting at the diner one afternoon drinking sodas, watching the rain streak the window. The place was half empty. The jukebox was playing some old country song. Travis leaned across the booth and said, real quiet, that his uncle had seen something strange near the old lumberyard outside town. I told him to stop screwing around. He said his uncle had seen someone standing near the fence line, tall, wearing a work coat that looked burned through in patches, face covered by some kind of metal mask. I laughed, told him maybe his uncle had too many beers again. But Travis didn't laugh. He said his uncle swore the man just stood there facing the trees, not moving even when he yelled. For the rest of that week, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. By fall, the woods behind town felt wrong. Dead quiet. Even the crickets stopped singing after sunset. My mom stopped letting me walk home from school. She'd pull up in her old Buick every day at 3:15 sharp, locking the doors the second I got in. You could feel fear spreading like a sickness through Mason Creek. Then one Saturday, Travis called me. His voice was shaking. He said he found something near the old drainage tunnels by the lumberyard. When I met him, the air smelled like wet dirt and rust. He led me down a narrow trail toward the back of the property. The tunnels were half buried in weeds, spray painted with graffiti. He pointed at one of the walls. Someone had written in dripping red paint, "The splitter waits below." I told him it was probably just a joke. Some punk trying to scare people, but then he pointed down at the ground. The mud was fresh, footprints leading into one of the tunnels. We both stood there, listening. Somewhere inside, metal scraped against concrete. I whispered for him to leave it alone, but he stepped closer, his flashlight beam shaking in the dark. The sound came again, louder, dragging and sharp. I grabbed his arm. We ran all the way back to the road, hearts pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound kept replaying in my head, the metallic screech echoing through the tunnel. I stared at the ceiling for hours. Around 2:17 a.m., I heard something tapping at my window. When I pulled back the curtain, it was Travis. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He told me he'd gone back. I told him he was insane. He said I had to see what he found. I don't know why I agreed. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was something else. But I followed him, flashlight in hand, back through the woods toward the tunnels. The air was colder than before, the trees swaying without wind. We reached the entrance, and that smell hit me again, iron and decay. The tunnel mouth yawned open, pitch black. Inside, something flickered, faint orange light from deeper within. We moved slowly, our shoes splashing through shallow water. Pipes lined the ceiling, dripping. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. The tunnel widened into an old maintenance room. That's when I saw the wall. There were photos pinned there, yearbook pictures, newspaper clippings, missing posters. Laura, Jesse, Molly, and more faces I didn't know. Travis whispered that we needed to go. Then we heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, dragging across the concrete. We turned, and in that flickering light, I saw him. A tall figure in a torn work coat, welding mask reflecting our flashlight, in one hand a jagged rusted blade, the other hanging limp like it didn't work right. The splitter. Travis froze. I shouted for him to run. We bolted, crashing through the tunnel, slipping in the mud. I didn't look back until I saw the road lights ahead. When I turned, the tunnel mouth was empty. The cops didn't believe us. They went out there the next morning and said the place was empty. No photos, no footprints, no sign of anyone. A week later, Travis disappeared. They found his bike at the trailhead by the lumberyard. Nothing else. After that, my mom packed our things and moved us to Dallas. I tried to forget. I built a new life. For years, I managed to convince myself none of it was real. Then, a few months ago, I took a service call out near Deep Ellum. Some Airbnb host said the vending machine in her lobby was acting up. I fixed it, but she told me something that made my stomach turn. She said every night, around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her door. Heavy ones, but the hallway was carpeted. I laughed it off until she said the sound always stopped right at her door, 2 weeks later, driving home late, I saw a black SUV in my rearview mirror. It followed me down I-35 for almost 20 minutes. When I pulled over at an exit, it vanished. Just gone. I waited there, heart pounding, before getting back on the road. That night, I dreamed of Mason Creek again. In the dream, I was back in that tunnel, flashlight shaking, that scraping sound echoing closer and closer, until I could almost feel the breath of something behind me. When I woke up, my phone buzzed. A message from a local Texas exploration group I joined years ago. Someone had posted photos from the ruins of Mason Creek's lumberyard. The caption said, "Found this near the tunnels." Look familiar? The photo showed a rusted welding mask lying in the dirt, half covered in moss. Scratched into the concrete beneath it were the words, "The splitter waits below." I told myself it was probably fake, just another internet hoax. But then, 2 nights later, while driving a late shift toward downtown Dallas, I stopped at a DART station for a soda. It was almost midnight. When the train pulled up, a woman stepped on board. She froze. Every passenger in the car was facing her, silent, heads tilted slightly in the same direction, like they'd been waiting. She stepped back, but the doors closed. I didn't see what happened next. The train slid away into the dark, the windows flickering past like dying eyes. That image stuck in my mind all night, and I couldn't shake the thought. What if they weren't people? What if they were waiting for someone like me? The next morning, my route took me past Mason Creek. I hadn't been there in over 20 years, but my hands turned the wheel before I even realized it. The main road was overgrown, cracked, and empty. The houses sagged under the weight of time. I parked near where the diner used to be, now a hollow shell with vines crawling up its windows. I walked until I reached the woods. The air felt heavy again, the same way it used to before a storm. I don't know why I went deeper, but I did. My boots sank into the mud, and soon I saw the tunnel entrance ahead, choked with weeds. It looked smaller than I remembered, but I swear I heard something inside. That same metallic scrape, slow and rhythmic, like someone sharpening a blade. I stood there, frozen. My flashlight flickered, then died. The sound came closer. I should have run, but I didn't. I just stood there, breathing hard, every part of me screaming to move, and that's when I saw a shape step out from the darkness. Tall, burned, masked. A whisper crawled through the air, almost human, almost mechanical. "Found you." I stumbled back, fell into the mud, crawled toward the road, heart slamming in my chest. When I looked back, the tunnel was empty again. That was 3 nights ago. Now, every time I close my eyes, I hear the dragging footsteps again, slow and steady, moving closer through the dark. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving the empty roads outside Dallas, I catch a shape in my rearview mirror. Tall, still, watching. The splitter never left Mason Creek. He just found new roads to follow. I was 13 when it happened, though the memory still crawls through my head like a shadow that never learned how to fade. My name's Aaron Price, and I used to live just outside Austin, Texas, in a tiny town called Copper Bend. Back then, it wasn't much more than a cluster of wooden houses, a feed store, a diner, and the faint hum of music drifting from the bars down near 6th Street whenever the wind blew right. My mom worked nights at the hospital, and my dad played guitar at a small bar where the crowd was always half drunk and half lonely. I was an only child, quiet and strange according to most people, always carrying a notebook full of songs I thought could change something inside me. I spent long nights on the back porch, listening to cicadas scream from the trees and watching the glow of downtown shimmer like a heartbeat miles away. The air always felt heavy in Copper Bend, like the whole place was holding its breath. I never really understood what it was waiting for. That summer, I started renting a small room above a pawn shop near 6th Street. I was 17 by then, trying to chase music instead of nightmares. The room was cheap because it was old, cracked walls, mildew on the bathroom ceiling, and a single window facing an alley where the same cat yowled every night at 2:17 a.m. The landlord told me a musician had died there a few years back, hung himself with a microphone cable. I laughed it off then. But sometimes when I strummed my guitar, I swore I could feel someone else's rhythm pressing against mine. I spent my nights writing lyrics by candlelight because the bulb flickered like it couldn't make up its mind whether to live or die. That's when I first heard it. A whisper, soft but clear, repeating the words I hadn't written yet. It wasn't coming from the street or through the walls. It was right behind me, like someone leaning close enough for their breath to brush my ear. The voice said the next line before I could think it. I froze, staring at the paper, heart hammering. When I picked up my pen to write, the words were already there, smudged, like someone had written them in dust. I told myself it was exhaustion. Musicians talk to ghosts all the time, they just call it inspiration. But the whisper kept returning, each night a little louder. Sometimes it hummed the melody before I could find it. Sometimes it laughed when I messed up. I turned around fast, expecting to see someone in the room, but there was never anyone there, just that candle flame trembling like it was afraid to. One night around 3:19 a.m., I recorded a demo. The playback sounded fine for the first few seconds, then something joined in, a faint voice singing along with me, a low and broken harmony. When I stopped the recording, the voice didn't. It kept singing for 3 more seconds after the tape ended. I stopped sleeping. Every sound in that apartment felt alive, the pipes sighing, the floorboards creaking like someone pacing in circles. I moved the bed to the opposite wall, facing the door. I thought maybe it would help if I could see what was coming. It didn't. One morning, I packed up my guitar and went running to clear my head. I took the trail around Lady Bird Lake, the one that winds past the trees and under the bridges. The sun was barely up, and the air smelled like damp stone. There was a man standing near the edge of the water, staring at it like he was waiting for it to speak. He was tall, wearing an old denim jacket, no shoes. I jogged past him, trying not to stare, but something about his stillness felt wrong, like he wasn't breathing. When I turned my head back a moment later, he was gone. I slowed down, scanning the path, the trees, the water. The air was dead silent. Then I heard footsteps behind me, fast, heavy. My heart jumped. When I turned again, he was there, standing inches away, eyes hollow, mouth half open. His breath came out in short, wet bursts, like he was struggling to speak. I stumbled backward, tripped, and when I looked up again, he was gone. The trail was empty except for the sound of water lapping at the shore. That night, I couldn't play music. My hands shook too much. I kept seeing that man's face, pale and silent like he'd followed me home. Around 2:43 a.m., I heard footsteps in the alley behind my window, slow and dragging, crunching over gravel. I peeked through the curtain and saw a figure standing by the dumpster, head tilted toward my window. The streetlight flickered, and in that blink of darkness, he was gone. I told myself I was losing it. I stopped going to the lake, stopped walking alone. The only thing that felt real anymore was driving. So I started doing late-night rideshare shifts to make rent. The city felt quieter after midnight, like all the noise had sunk underground. One night, I picked up a passenger near South Congress. The request had no profile picture, just the name L. When I pulled up, no one was there. Then, out of the dark, a man stepped forward. Tall, denim jacket, no shoes. My throat closed. He opened the back door and slid in without a sound. The car filled with the smell of river water. I asked where he was headed. He handed me a folded paper with an address scribbled in shaky handwriting. It was on the outskirts of town, near a stretch of road I'd never heard of. The ride was silent. The only sound was his breathing, slow and uneven. I checked the mirror once just to be sure he was real, and his eyes were already looking back at me. When we got there, the GPS said I'd arrived. The road ended at a field of tall grass and an old house slouched at the edge of the trees. Windows boarded, porch collapsed, no lights, no cars. I turned around to tell him we'd reached the place, but the back seat was empty, just wet footprints across the mat, fading fast. I floored it back to town, shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel straight. I quit rideshare that night, told myself I'd stick to music. But music didn't feel safe anymore. The whispers came back, softer this time, asking questions I couldn't answer. Who do you think wrote the song? Who do you think called you? I tried moving. packed my guitar, my notebook, and left the pawn shop room for a cheap trailer on the edge of Copper Bend. But ghosts don't stay where you leave them. A few days later, my neighbor, an old man named Dwight who liked to sit outside drinking warm beer, told me someone had been knocking on my door every night around 3 a.m. He said it was a tall man with wet clothes who smelled like the river. I started sleeping with the lights on. Weeks passed. The voice never left. It just changed shape. Sometimes it came through the radio, whispering between static. Sometimes I'd hear humming outside, slow and broken, like a tune that didn't want to end. Once, when I opened my notebook, there was a new page written in handwriting that wasn't mine. It said, "You shouldn't have run." I stopped writing songs. My guitar gathered dust. My parents called asking when I'd visit again, and I told them soon, but I never did. The thought of driving those roads at night made my chest ache. Then one evening around 7:45 p.m., I was sitting on the porch watching the sky turn purple when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, no message, just a voice recording. It was my old song, the one I'd recorded in that apartment, except it wasn't my voice singing. It was deeper, slower, and behind it, faintly, was the sound of water. That night, I couldn't stay still. I got in the car and drove toward the city without a plan. The highway lights blurred in the rain. I ended up near the same trail by the lake. The air was thick and quiet. I parked by the trees and sat there listening. Nothing. Then I saw movement by the water. Someone standing, staring out, same as before. I opened the door and stepped into the mud. My legs moved before my mind did. The figure didn't turn around. The water glowed faintly in the moonlight, and for a moment, I thought maybe it wasn't real, maybe it was just a reflection. But when I blinked, the figure was right beside me, whispering the words I hadn't spoken yet. "You shouldn't have stopped singing." I woke up in my car hours later, soaked, with no memory of leaving the shore. My phone was on the passenger seat. A new voice memo was open, timestamp 2:17 a.m. The recording was 5 minutes of silence, except for the faint sound of breathing, mine and someone else's. I left Copper Bend the next morning, sold the guitar, deleted the songs, burned the notebook. I told myself it was over, that maybe ghosts only live in places you feed them. A year passed. I moved to Houston, took a job repairing instruments, stayed away from late nights and dark roads. But a few weeks ago, I got a call from my mom. She was cleaning out old boxes and found one labeled Aaron's Songs. Inside was a cassette tape melted at the edges. She said it played fine though, and that she recognized the melody, the one I used to hum as a kid. Then she got quiet and said something that still makes my stomach twist. She said there were 2 voices on it. Mine and another one singing the same words, just a half second behind. I told her to throw it away, to burn it, to never play it again. She said she would, but sometimes, late at night, I hear that same tune humming through the walls of my apartment. I tell myself it's nothing, that maybe the city's full of echoes. But last night when I came home from work, there was a puddle of water by my door. My guitar, the one I sold, was leaning against the wall, and someone had carved a single line into the wood. It said, "Do you remember me yet?" I was 24 when I left New York and drove south toward the quiet edges of San Antonio. The sky that morning looked bruised, heavy with the promise of rain, and I remember thinking maybe it was a sign. I wasn't running from something exactly, just trying to find a place small enough where I could hear myself think. I ended up in a forgotten town called Seguin Ridge, about 40 minutes out from the city. Folks there said the air smelled different, like wet cedar and rust. And at night, the coyotes howled so close you'd swear they were just behind your window. Back then, I got a job as a night clerk at a roadside motel called the Whispering Pines. 20 rooms, half of them empty, the rest full of travelers who never stayed more than a night. The neon sign outside buzzed like a swarm of bees, and the letters flickered so it read, Hispin ES instead of the full name. The carpet inside was old, sticky in some places, and the lobby smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. My boss, a grumpy man named Walter, barely spoke unless it was payday. He lived upstairs and smoked so much, that the whole place carried his ghostly haze. Most nights were slow. I'd sit behind a desk with an old radio playing low country songs, flipping through magazines and pretending I wasn't alone. Every now and then, a couple from the highway would stumble in, asking for a room to sleep off the beer. Once in a while, a trucker would pay for 2 nights and stay 1, leaving early before the sun touched the parking lot. Then, one Thursday night in late November, this man walked in. The bell over the door gave a sharp ring that made me jump. He was tall and thin, dressed too clean for a place like that. His shirt was tucked perfectly, boots shined, hair slicked back like he'd come straight from a funeral. He had a kind of stillness that didn't belong in Texas heat. "Evening," he said in a soft drawl. I nodded, pulling the logbook toward me. "Late check-in?" "Just passing through," he murmured, eyes scanning the room like he was memorizing every corner. His name, he wrote down, was Leo Hensley. Paid cash for 1 night, room 7. He smiled when I handed him the key, that polite, too careful kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. He came back down an hour later while I was brewing coffee. Asked if there was anywhere nearby to grab a bite. I told him about a diner a mile east, said it stayed open till 1:30. He thanked me, slow and quiet, and walked out into the rain. I watched through the glass as he crossed the parking lot, his shadow stretching long under the streetlight until it disappeared into the dark. That was the first night I saw him. He checked in again the next week. Same room, same time, same calm smile. After that, it became a pattern. Every Thursday night, he never asked for another room. He never asked for company. Just came, stayed till morning, left without a sound. One night, curiosity got the better of me. When he dropped his key at the desk before dawn, I asked if he traveled for work. He paused, looked at me like he was deciding something, then said, "I prefer quiet places." He wasn't lying about that. Sometimes I'd hear him humming through the thin motel walls. Not a song I recognized, just a slow tune that made the hair on my arms rise. A few times I found things in the lobby after he left. An old coin, a folded napkin with strange symbols drawn in pen, once even a small Polaroid of a forest. When I asked Walter if he knew anything about him, he shrugged. "People like that pass through all the time," he said. "Don't ask questions." Still, I couldn't help it. I started noticing small things. The way the air felt colder whenever he was near. The faint smell of iron and pine that lingered after he left. And the way my own reflection in the lobby mirror seemed delayed when he walked past, like the glass wasn't keeping up. One Thursday, he arrived soaked from rain. His boots left muddy prints on the tile, but his clothes were spotless. When I handed him the key, he smiled faintly and said, "You ever been to the river walk after midnight?" I shook my head. "You should go," he said. "Sometimes you hear the water whisper." That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2:17 a.m., I stepped outside to breathe. The rain had stopped, and the air was thick with mist. The motel lights flickered, and for a moment, I heard footsteps behind me, soft and slow, matching my pace. I turned, heart hammering, but there was no one there, only the empty lot and the hum of the power lines. The next morning, room 7 was empty again, but the sheets were damp with something that wasn't water. I told Walter, but he just scowled, said maybe the guy spilled his drink. The following week, he didn't show up. For 3 Thursdays straight, no Leo. Then one morning, a sheriff came by asking questions. Said a girl from a nearby motel had gone missing. Last seen getting into a pickup truck with a man fitting his description. Quiet type, glasses, pale skin, dark boots. I told him I knew someone like that, showed him the name in the register. The sheriff nodded, said they'd look into it. That night, I found a small gift box behind the counter. No one had been in since sunset. Inside was a charm bracelet, delicate silver, with a single engraved letter L. My name's Laura. The next few nights, I didn't sleep. I kept hearing things outside the office window. Faint scratching, soft humming that rose and faded with the wind. One night, the door creaked open on its own, the bell ringing even though no one was there. When I checked the parking lot, there were fresh footprints in the mud, leading straight to room 7. I quit 2 days later. Packed up, left town. I thought maybe I could start over, moved closer to downtown San Antonio, got a job at a diner near the Alamo. I told myself the past was gone, that Leo, or whatever his name was, had disappeared into the dark where he belonged. But San Antonio has its own ghosts. Some nights after my shift, I'd walk the river walk to clear my head. The lights shimmered on the water, couples laughing, the smell of food and music floating through the air. It almost felt normal, until one night, just past midnight, I heard slow footsteps behind me. I turned. No one. The sound matched mine perfectly, heel for heel, even when I stopped. I could hear breathing, faint and patient. I told myself it was nerves, shadows playing tricks. A week later, a couple staying at a nearby hotel came in for breakfast at the diner, pale and shaken. They said when they woke up, their suitcases were open, their clothes scattered, the chairs moved around the room. But the door was still locked from the inside. The man laughed nervously when he said it, but his wife didn't. She just stared down at her coffee, eyes hollow. Then came the night I closed alone. It was just after 2:43 a.m. when I heard the front door creak. I froze, spatula in hand, listening. A figure stood outside the glass. Tall, still, face hidden in shadow. Then he turned, slow as if dragging time itself, and vanished down the street. I ran to lock the door, but when I reached it, a folded napkin lay on the counter. My name, written in neat black ink. The next day, I went to the sheriff again. He said the case from Seguin Ridge was long cold. No trace of Leo Hensley, no truck, no records, just gone. That night, I drove past the Alamo. The streets were almost empty, fog curling around the old stone walls. A streetlight flickered, and for a split second I saw someone walking ahead of me. His posture, his gait, it was him. I froze. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. When I blinked, the street was empty again. I don't know what keeps following me. Maybe it's guilt, maybe it's him. Sometimes, in the early hours, when the city's quiet and the air smells of rain, I wake to faint humming from somewhere in my apartment. The same tune from the motel. Last night, I found a silver charm bracelet on my nightstand, the letter L shining faintly in the dark. I threw it away, I always do. But it keeps coming back. Now when I walk home after work, I keep my eyes on the shadows that move across the porches in the King William district, the ones that shift even when the air is still. And when the footsteps start again behind me, slow and careful, matching my pace, I don't turn around anymore, because I know what I'll see. I wish I could tell you I imagined it, that what happened out near the edge of El Paso was just a bad dream or some twisted trick of exhaustion. But I know what I saw and what I heard, and what I still feel breathing behind me when I close my eyes. Back then, I was working nights as a highway maintenance driver, long, lonely shifts fixing lights and guardrails along the desert roads that stretch forever through the West. My name's David Marino. I grew up in Socorro, just outside El Paso, raised by my grandmother after my parents died in a car crash when I was 11. She always told me the desert keeps its dead close, that it whispers to the living when it's hungry. I used to laugh at that. I don't laugh anymore. It started one Friday in late July, the kind of night when the air feels thick with dust and heat even after the sun's gone. I'd been pulling double shifts, sleeping 4 hours a night, trying to save up for a down payment on a small place. My friend Marcus had just come back from Odessa after working a pipeline job, and our buddy Sean suggested a weekend off somewhere quiet. Marcus said his cousin owned a small lakeside trailer out by Red Ridge, near the state line, a few hours west of El Paso. No neighbors, no cell signal, no noise but the wind. It sounded perfect. We packed up that afternoon. Marcus filled the cooler with beer. Sean brought fishing rods and his old speaker, and I brought the truck. We hit the desert highway before sundown, the sky painted orange and purple, the air shimmering like the earth itself was burning. Sean leaned out the window with a grin, yelling that this was the start of our freedom. I remember laughing, thinking maybe I finally felt alive again after months of fatigue and noise. The road grew thinner the farther we drove. Asphalt turned to gravel, gravel to dirt. The radio went to static, and even the stars looked far away, like we were driving into a hole where the world forgot to exist. By the time we reached the trailer, the night was black and soundless except for the hum of cicadas. The lake shimmered under the moon like spilled oil, smooth and endless. We set up, cracked open the beers, and sat on the porch. The wind had died completely, the surface of the lake still as glass. Sean started playing some old country song from his phone, laughing at his own terrible dance moves. For a while, it was perfect. 3 tired men drinking cheap beer under a Texas sky so wide it made you feel small in the best way. When I finally turned in, it was past midnight. Marcus had taken the couch, Sean passed out in a chair outside, and I stretched out on an old cot by the window, the one facing the lake. The hum of insects was soft, almost hypnotic, and I drifted off thinking how rare it was for silence to feel so good. I woke up around 2:17 a.m. and knew something was wrong. The quiet had changed. It wasn't peace anymore, it was hollow. The kind of silence that presses against your skin and makes your heartbeat sound too loud. No crickets, no wind, not even the faint buzz of the fridge. Then came the sound, a splash, deep and heavy, like someone had dropped a cinder block into the water. I sat up fast, blinking into the darkness. The surface of the lake rippled under the moonlight, and that's when I saw it, a shape floating out near the center. At first I thought it was driftwood, but it moved. Slowly, the pale outline of a human body, face down, arms spread wide. My throat tightened. I whispered Marcus's name, shaking his shoulder until he groaned. He thought I was dreaming, but when he looked out the window, he froze. That shape was real. Sean stumbled in from outside, still half drunk, but one look at the lake sobered him fast. We grabbed a flashlight and stumbled down the dirt path barefoot, the air cold and damp. The closer we got, the clearer it became. A man floating, shirt torn, skin pale as wax. Marcus called out, asking if he was okay, but there was no answer. The beam of light caught the man's face just as the current rolled him a little, and I'll never forget what I saw. His skin looked burned, blackened around the mouth and eyes, his lips moving, though no sound came out. Marcus reached out from the dock, hands shaking. Then he jerked back, his face twisting like he'd been shocked. He stammered something, said the thing had looked straight at him. I didn't want to believe it, but the next second the figure twitched. The head turned toward us, slowly, water dripping from its ruined mouth. Then, without warning, it rolled over and sank. Gone. The lake went still again. We ran back to the trailer and locked the door. Marcus kept rubbing his hand like it burned. There was a red print across his skin, shaped like a hand but smaller, like a child's. Sean kept pacing, muttering that we had to leave at first light. Nobody slept. Every creak of the old wood made us jump. When dawn came, the world looked normal again. Birds chirping, the water shining calm and blue. We told ourselves it had to be some weird trick of moonlight, maybe a hallucination from too much beer and not enough sleep. Still, we drove into town to tell the sheriff. They searched the lake, found nothing. No body, no clothes, no signs of anyone missing. The sheriff patted Marcus's shoulder and told him to drink water and rest. We drove home in silence. For a few days, everything seemed fine. Then Marcus started calling me late at night saying he couldn't sleep. He said he kept hearing dripping water in his room, even though nothing was leaking. One night, he swore he saw wet footprints leading from his window to his bed. The following week, he stopped answering calls. I drove to his apartment. The door was locked from the inside. When the police got in, there was no sign of a struggle, just his window open and a puddle by the nightstand. Sean stopped talking to me after that. He moved to Dallas. Said he couldn't handle remembering that night. I went back to work, but the road didn't feel the same. Every highway felt emptier, every shadow longer. Then, 2 months later, I started driving the western routes again. The ones near the border, long stretches of nothing but asphalt, sand, and fence wire. One night, heading through West El Paso, I saw someone on the side of the road. A hitchhiker, tall, thin, wearing a dark jacket. I slowed down, instinct kicking in to check if they needed help. The man didn't move. just stared. His face looked too pale, too still. Something in my gut told me to keep driving, so I did. 15 minutes later, I saw him again. Same man, same jacket. Standing closer to the shoulder, head tilted like he was listening for something. My chest went cold. I pressed harder on the gas. Another 5 minutes, and he was there again, this time right next to my lane. I saw his face clearly as my headlights hit him. The eyes were white, no pupils. I swerved so hard I almost flipped the truck. When I looked back in the mirror, the road was empty. I didn't stop driving until I reached a small border motel outside Tornillo. The place was half empty, flickering neon sign reading D.E. Sear, NN. I was shaking when I checked in, the clerk staring at me like he'd seen this kind of fear before. My room smelled like dust and old smoke. I showered, left the light on, and lay down. At some point I drifted off, and that's when I woke to the sound. A slow, steady breathing beneath the bed. My stomach twisted because the floor was concrete. Nothing could be under there. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. It kept going, long inhales, soft exhales, like something waiting for me to look. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it down. Nothing. The air was cold, too cold for a desert night. I stood up, and that's when I heard it, a whisper, clear, right behind me, in perfect Spanish. Te encontré. I found you. The air seemed to collapse in my chest. The whisper came again, softer this time, coming from the window. I turned slowly, and there he was, Marcus. Or what was left of him, his skin gray and wet, his eyes blank white. Water dripped from his clothes, pooling on the floor. His lips moved, forming words that barely sounded human. Why you, not me? I stumbled back, hit the nightstand, and the light went out. When I opened my eyes again, the room was empty except for the sound of dripping. I grabbed my keys and ran. I drove through the night without stopping, back toward the city lights, praying the sun would rise faster. Every mile felt heavier, the truck rattling like it carried something more than me. I didn't look in the mirrors, didn't dare. The next morning I parked outside a diner off the main highway, shaking so bad I could barely drink my coffee. The waitress said I looked pale as a ghost. I laughed, but it came out cracked and dry. When I went to the restroom to wash my face, I saw it in the mirror. Small, wet handprints on my shoulder. I moved back to the city after that. Quit the highway job. Tried to start fresh. But some nights, I still wake to silence that feels wrong, like the desert's holding its breath. I hear the faint sound of dripping water, sometimes even that voice, whispering in Spanish from far away. Te encontré. They say the desert keeps its dead close. I believe it now. Whatever I saw out there by that lake, whatever found Marcus, it followed me. Maybe it always will. I never believed silence could sound like breathing. That night, it did. It was steady, slow, coming from the dark just beyond the glow of the streetlight outside my truck. Back then, I wasn't the man I am now. My name's Nathan Cole, 32, a mechanic in Fort Worth, Texas. I'd grown up around oil stains, busted carburetors, and country static humming through cracked radio speakers. After my father died in a garage accident when I was 17, I took over his old repair shop out by the edge of town. It was quiet work, honest, lonely, and often too still. Nights were the hardest. I'd shut the lights, lock up, and still feel like someone was waiting in the dark behind the bay door. I'd been running myself dry, fixing engines all day, sleeping on my couch most nights. That's what I was doing the night everything changed. It was one of those sticky, humid Texas nights when the air feels alive, thick with the scent of asphalt and wet dust. I had just finished a brake job for an old Chevy and decided to drive out near the stockyards for a late-night smoke. The area was mostly empty by that hour, just a few old bars flickering neon and the faint echo of country music drifting from somewhere unseen. I parked near the edge of a cracked gravel lot right across from a boarded-up feed store. The air buzzed with cicadas. I lit a cigarette and leaned back in the seat, trying to ignore the tension sitting in my chest like bad weather. The clock on my dash read 2:17 a.m. Then I heard it, boots scraping the gravel, slow, deliberate steps circling my truck. At first, I thought maybe it was some drunk wandering back from a bar, but when I looked out, the lot was empty. Just the yellow glow of the streetlight and my own reflection staring back from the glass. The sound came again, closer this time, right by my tailgate. Crunch. Crunch. I leaned forward, scanning the mirrors. Nothing. My cigarette trembled in my hand, ash spilling onto my jeans. Then, a faint tapping, like someone's knuckles dragging across the side of the truck. I turned the key, engine rumbling to life, headlights sweeping the lot. Empty. The noise stopped. I told myself I was tired, overworked, imagining things. But when I pulled out of the lot, my headlights caught something near the edge of the road, a pair of boot prints in the dust, fresh, leading away from where I'd parked. I didn't sleep that night. A few days later, I went to help my friend Mara, who had just moved into an old 2-story home near the Trinity River. She was restoring it, trying to turn it into a bed and breakfast. The place had charm red brick, a white porch, and oak trees that leaned so close they seemed to whisper. But inside, it smelled faintly of wet earth, like the walls had been breathing underground. Mara was cheerful but tired. She said every morning she found muddy footprints on the staircase, each print going up, none coming down. She laughed about it, said it was probably a leak or maybe the workers, but the way her voice cracked told me she didn't believe that. I told her I'd stay the night, keep her company while she worked. She agreed. We ate takeout on the porch until the sky turned to ink. Around midnight, she went to bed upstairs, and I crashed on the couch in the living room. Sometime after 2:40 a.m., I woke to the creak of wood. The sound of slow, heavy steps moving up the staircase. I thought it was Mara at first, but when I glanced up, the hallway light upstairs flickered on, then off again. My chest tightened. I whispered her name. No reply. The air grew thick, pressing against my skin. I stood and looked toward the stairs and froze. There, faintly glowing in the moonlight through the window, were wet footprints on the steps. They led upward one by one, stopping halfway, then vanishing in the darkness. I gripped the banister, following the prints up, heart hammering. But at the landing, there were no prints coming down, just silence. Mara's door was open. I pushed it gently. She was asleep, peaceful, untouched. But on the window glass behind her bed, written in fog, were the words, "I see you." I left before dawn. By then, I'd started feeling watched everywhere I went. The nights got worse. My tools would go missing from the garage, then reappear, lined up perfectly on the counter. The phone would ring after midnight, and no one would speak. One night, I decided to run to clear my head. There's a small trail outside town, near Eagle Mountain Lake, where I used to jog at night. The moon hung low that evening, cutting the path in silver light. The water glimmered quietly beyond the trees. I ran fast, trying to tire myself, to burn out the fear sitting deep inside me. After a few minutes, I noticed something strange. My shadow stretched long across the dirt trail, flickering with my steps, but it wasn't alone. Another shadow ran beside it. It moved when I did, matched my pace perfectly. My breath caught. I turned, nothing behind me. Just trees and the faint rustle of leaves. I looked down again, 2 shadows still running, mine and one longer, thinner, reaching out toward me. I stopped. The shadow didn't. It kept running for another 2 seconds, then froze, then faded. That was the night I knew something had followed me from that rest stop, or maybe from Mara's house, or maybe from somewhere older. The following week, I started finding mud on my workshop floor, though I hadn't been near the river. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of movement in the reflection of a windshield, a flicker of someone standing just behind me, gone when I turned. One night, I stayed late at the shop fixing an engine. Around 3:12 a.m., I heard someone humming outside. Low, tuneless, almost like breathing. I turned off the wrench, walked toward the door, and saw a dark blue van parked across the road. The driver's side door creaked open. A man stepped out. He was wearing a long beige coat, glasses that caught the dim street light, and boots that scuffed the gravel just like before. My heart seized. He turned his head slowly toward me, Even through the glass, I could see him smiling. I locked the door and backed up. The lights flickered overhead. My tools began to rattle on the shelves. Then a whisper came from behind me. "Don't make me hurt you." I spun. No one there. The whisper came again, closer, from inside my head or maybe the air itself. I grabbed the nearest wrench and ran out the back. The alley behind the shop was empty, but when I glanced down, my footprints weren't alone. Boot prints followed right beside them. I got in my truck and drove to Mara's place, shaking, telling myself I was losing it. But when I got there, her front door was wide open. I stepped inside and called out her name. The floorboards creaked. The lights buzzed. Upstairs, muddy prints again, fresh, leading up, none down. I climbed slowly, gripping the rail tight. Her bedroom door was closed. I pushed it open. The bed was empty, sheets torn. On the wall, written in dark, wet streaks, were the words, "You should have stayed asleep." I stumbled back, nearly tripping down the stairs. Something moved in the corner. A flicker of shape, tall, pale, with eyes too still, like it had been waiting. I ran for the door, slammed it shut behind me, and kept driving until the sun rose. The police said she was gone. No forced entry, no struggle, just those prints. They searched the woods, the lake, nothing. For months, I couldn't sleep. Every night, I'd hear footsteps outside my house, slow, circling, pausing by the window. I'd see faint boot marks in the dirt each morning, never leading away. A few weeks ago, I decided to face it. To end it. I went back to that same gravel lot by the stockyards where it began. The night was quiet. My headlights flickered. I stepped out, waiting, listening. At 2:17 a.m., I heard them again. Boots, slow, dragging, circling, my breath clouded in the air. I whispered, "Who are you?" The air shifted. From the dark came the same low voice I'd heard in my shop, soft, almost kind. "You already know." And then, from the glow of my truck's headlights, I saw it. Not a man this time, but something that wore the shape of one skin pale as paper, coat too clean, smile too wide. It stepped forward, boots crunching the gravel. I ran to my truck, fumbling the keys. The headlights flickered once more, then died. Everything went black. When they found the truck the next morning, the doors were open, the engine off. On the windshield, tucked under the wiper, was a folded note. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, almost like mine. It read, "Stay out of the light, Nathan. You never left the rest stop." I always thought the sea had its own kind of silence, the kind that hums behind your ears and makes you feel smaller than you ever wanted to be. I grew up in Corpus Christi, Texas, the kind of town where the waves hit harder than the wind and the locals still nod to each other even if they don't remember why. My name's Jackson Cole. I work at the marina, fixing up boats for tourists who come down for weekend fishing trips and leave with sunburns and tall tales. I've lived here my whole life, long enough to know which waters hide rocks and which nights you stay away from the pier. Folks around here like to talk about hurricanes and the war, but not about the Redden house out by Laguna Shore. Everyone knew about it. The locals whispered that it was cursed, swallowed by the sea's anger back in the 50s. The old Redden family disappeared one night after a storm. Some said the house got flooded. Others said it stood dry and silent while the sea rose around it. Either way, no one saw the family again. The county posted warning signs near it years ago, but the boards have rotted away, and the path that leads to it is still there, half buried under grass and sand. I was 17 when I started walking that way home from work. The main road curved too far inland, and the shortcut through the dunes saved me half an hour. I'd see that slanted roof peeking through the palmettos, shingles curling like dry skin, windows cloudy with salt. The house seemed to lean forward, like it wanted to whisper something. My mom used to say, "Jackson, don't look at what's already dead." She meant the sea, the wrecks, and maybe that house too. One evening, late summer, I was heading home after patching a skiff. The air was thick, the kind that sticks to your throat. The tide was crawling in slow, and the gulls were quiet for once. That's when I saw someone standing by the fence of the Redden place. A tall man in a black coat, too heavy for the heat. His hair was silver, slicked back, and his skin looked thin like paper. Even from a distance, I could tell he didn't belong there. Corpus has a look to it. People here are sun-baked, weathered, like driftwood. But this man was pale, clean, his shoes polished even though the ground was soft with sand. "Evening, son," he said when I got close. His voice was rough but calm, like gravel rolling under water. "Evening," I muttered, gripping the strap of my bag. "You walk this way often?" "Sometimes." "Just heading home." He nodded slow, eyes not blinking much. "That's good. Keeps the legs strong. People don't walk much anymore. They drive. They forget the ground that holds them up." I didn't answer. Something about the way he said it made the air feel colder. "You from here?" he asked. "Born and raised." "Ah, Corpus Christi," he said softly. "The blessed body. Funny name for a place that drowns so many." His mouth twisted like he was smiling but didn't quite know how. Then he tilted his head. "Your folks waiting for you?" "Yeah," I said. "Good, good. Best to get home before the dark tide rolls in." He tapped his cane once on the sand, and for the first time, I noticed the sound didn't fit. It wasn't dull, like sand should make. It was sharp, like striking stone. He glanced at the house behind him. "You ever been inside?" I shook my head. "No, sir. I've heard it's falling apart." He chuckled, a low rattling sound that made my stomach tighten. "Falling apart?" "Oh no, it doesn't fall apart. It shifts." "Shifts?" "Rooms move. Doors lead to places that weren't there before. The house doesn't like being left alone." I tried to laugh, but he came out nervous. "Like a fun house?" "Not fun," he said. "Hungry." I started stepping back. He looked at me like he could see straight through. "I went in once, when I was a boy. With 3 friends. Tommy, Luke, and Sarah. The house took them. It liked them more than me, I think. Been trying to get out ever since." "You live there?" I said before I could stop myself. "Live?" He smiled, wide and wrong, let's call it that. Then he leaned closer. "Do me a favor, boy. If you ever hear someone calling your name from that porch, don't answer. Promise me." I nodded fast. "Okay." "Good. That's a smart lad." He turned and walked off toward the dunes, his cane tapping rhythmically like a heartbeat. I could hear him humming something, a tune that reminded me of an old church hymn my grandma used to hum when she cooked. When I got home, my mom was at the sink, and I told her about the man. She frowned. "There's no one living out there, Jackson. That place is sealed off." "I saw him," I said. He said he's been stuck there." She wiped her hands on a towel, probably some drifter passing through. Let it be. But I knew he wasn't just some drifter. A week later, county trucks rolled up near Laguna Shore with yellow tape and bulldozers. They said they were finally tearing the Redden house down. Been on hold for decades. I stood by the dock after work, watching the machines roll over the dunes. By the weekend, it was gone. Just sand and splintered wood. Then the new spread workers found bones under the house. 3 sets. Kids. The coroner said they were too old to identify. The fabric on the clothes turned to dust. No records matched. No missing children in the area that far back. Tommy, Luke, Sarah, the names he'd said. I didn't tell anyone, not even my mom. Months passed. The dunes settled. The wind carried the smell of salt and decay again. I'd tell myself it was over. But sometimes, walking home after dark, I'd hear a faint tapping, like a cane hitting the road behind me. I told myself it was my imagination, but it followed the same rhythm he'd used. One night, around 2:17 a.m., I woke up to that sound outside my window. Tap, 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 tap. Slow, patient, deliberate. When I looked out, the street was empty, the tide high and silver under the moon. After that, I started dreaming about the house, except it wasn't gone. In my dreams, it stood tall again, walls breathing, the door cracked open. A whisper would come from inside, soft like the tide under the pier. "Jackson, come help me. Jackson, you forgot me." I'd wake drenched in sweat, salt on my tongue. Weeks later, I took a late shift cleaning boats at the marina. The wind had picked up that night, the kind that makes the water slap hard against the docks. I was finishing up when I noticed my car door was open. I always lock it, always. Inside, on the passenger seat, someone had poured a small pile of sand, perfectly smooth, like it had been placed there carefully. I brushed it out, heart pounding, telling myself it was just the wind, just the damn wind. But the next night, I found more sand. This time, shaped like a small handprint. I didn't tell anyone. I just stopped driving at night. A few days later, I walked down to the pier to clear my head. The waves were dark, moving slow under the moonlight. That's when I heard it. A voice, faint, coming from under the pier. "Help me." I froze. The sound was soft but close. I leaned over the railing. Nothing but water. The voice came again, clearer now. "Jackson." I stumbled back. The sound was under me, not far, not deep. It felt like it was rising from the sea itself. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I told my boss I was sick. I stayed home, but even there, I felt something moving. At night, the air turned colder, and sometimes I'd feel a brush against my arm or shoulder, cold as the tide. Once, I swear I saw footprints forming in the sand near my porch, wet prints that led nowhere. I started drinking, just enough to sleep, but sleep didn't help. Every night I dreamed of the Redden house. It wasn't broken anymore. It was perfect, the windows glowing like eyes. Inside I could hear children laughing, then screaming. The laughter stopped when I tried to step closer. Then came the whisper, "You shouldn't have watched." One morning, I woke up to the sound of the waves crashing hard. The radio said a tropical storm was coming in. I packed a few things, thought about leaving town for a few days. But as I stepped outside, I saw footprints again, small ones leading from the street to my door. That night, the storm hit early. Rain hammered the windows. The wind howled through the cracks. Around midnight, my lights flickered. The air smelled like wet wood and salt. Then I heard it. A knock, slow, steady. "Jackson, you remember me yet?" The voice was just outside the door. I froze, every muscle locked. "Jackson, come help me." The door creaked. I grabbed the old fishing knife from the counter, holding it like it could save me. The wind blew the door open. The porch was empty. But the sand at the threshold shifted like something had just stepped inside. Then I saw it. 3 sets of wet footprints, small, leading into the living room. The air turned colder. The lights went out. In the flash of lightning, I saw the shape of a man standing by the window. Coat black, hair silver, cane in hand. His face was half shadow, but I saw his mouth curve. "Told you not to go in there." Then he was gone. The storm raged for hours. I stayed on the floor, knife trembling in my hand. When the morning came, the sky was pale and still. My floor was dry, no footprints, no sign of anything. I walked outside, heart pounding. The sand on the street was smooth again. I thought I imagined it all until I saw something under my car. A cane. Old, wooden, salt-stained. I didn't touch it. They tore down the Redden house, but it didn't matter. Some things don't stay buried. Some places remember who looked at them too long. Now, when I walk by the beach after sundown, I keep my head down. I don't look toward Laguna Shore, and if I hear my name in the wind, I walk faster. Because I know if I ever look up, I'll see him standing by the gate again, tapping that cane, smiling like the sea itself taught him how. I remember the first time I saw her reflection in the glass. It was early, still dark, the kind of stillness that makes you hold your breath without realizing it. Something about that quiet hour before dawn in Lubbock always felt heavier than it should, like the air carried the weight of old stories, the kind no one ever finishes telling. I grew up in a small Texas town a few miles outside Lubbock, the kind of place where dust hung in the sunlight like ghosts and the wind never stopped moving. My father worked long hours fixing fences and tractors. My mother ran a diner off the highway. Summers smelled like diesel, sweet tea, and dry earth. Our town was the kind that didn't change much, except for the faces buried out behind the church. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone knew the stories too, especially about the old water tank at the edge of town, the one that groaned at night when the wind came down from the plains. Folks said it echoed with the voices of those who got lost out there after dark. I didn't believe it back then. I believed in what I could see, touch, fix. I was a practical kid. I went to Texas Tech for college, stayed in one of those tall dorms near campus, the kind of building where every hallway smells like microwave noodles and the hum of air vents never stops. I didn't have much, just a scholarship and a part-time job at a late-night gas station out by the cotton fields. My room was on the 10th floor, corner side, window facing north toward the flat miles of farmland and open dark. The first week, I thought the view was peaceful. Then things started changing. It began with the handprints, sticky, dark, child-sized, pressed against the outside of my window. 10 floors up, I noticed them one morning when the sun rose pale orange over the plains. I wiped them clean, thinking maybe some prank or condensation had smeared something weird, but the next morning they were back, only this time higher, as if whoever left them had been reaching upward. The glass felt tacky under my fingers. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to sound paranoid. A few nights later, around 2:17 a.m., I woke to tapping. 3 slow knocks on the glass, then silence. I sat up, my heart pounding so hard I thought I'd wake my roommate, but when I looked over, he wasn't there. He'd gone home for the weekend. I told myself it was just the wind, but the wind doesn't make rhythmic sounds like that. It doesn't make you feel watched. That morning, the handprints were there again. Fresh, and this time they trailed downward like something sliding. I tried to ignore it, focused on classes, work, anything else. But it followed me outside. I drive back from my shift along that dark Lubbock farm road that runs straight for miles, nothing but flat dirt and fence posts. One night, I saw headlights appear in my rearview mirror, 2 pale beams coming fast. I slowed down. The lights dimmed, then vanished. I thought maybe they'd turned off onto a dirt path, but there was nowhere to turn. When I sped up again, the lights returned. Closer this time, my pulse started to race. I pressed the pedal harder, the old truck rattling, and just as I reached the town limits, the headlights blinked out again. Gone. No taillights, no engine noise. Just me and the endless empty fields whispering against the night. By the time I got home, my hands were shaking. My trailer sat at the edge of a dry cotton lot. It wasn't much, just a rusted single wide I rented cheap. The kind where the wind made the walls groan and the floors creak even when you stood still. I told myself the quiet would help me study. I told myself that every sound out there had a reason. Then came the tapping. Every night, around 2:43 a.m., something would rap on the trailer wall. Not low, not near the ground like you'd expect, but high. Way higher than any person could reach without a ladder. Tap, 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 tap. Always 3 knocks, always in the same spot near my bedroom window. The first few nights I froze, staring at the ceiling, counting my heartbeats. After a week, I worked up the nerve to look. I pulled the curtain aside, slow, careful not to breathe too loud. Nothing. Just a flat stretch of land, moonlight washing over the fields. But the tapping started again the moment I turned away. It wore on me. Sleep turned shallow, dreams turned strange. I'd wake up thinking someone was standing beside the bed. I started seeing movement in reflections. Dark hair trailing in the corner of the mirror, fingers pressing against the fog on the bathroom glass. I kept telling myself I was tired, hallucinating, maybe working too many shifts. But there was one night I can't explain. I was driving home from campus after a late study group. The roads were slick from a light drizzle, fog starting to roll in. My headlights cut through the gray, and in the beam I saw something on the side of the road. A figure. Standing perfectly still. Long black hair, pale dress hanging limp in the windless air. I slowed, thinking maybe someone was hurt, but when I looked again, she was gone. Just gone. The fog where she'd been rippled like breath. I drove faster after that. The next morning I found muddy footprints leading from the road all the way up to my trailer steps. Bare feet. Small, narrow, each print filled with water even though it hadn't rained overnight. That day, I called my mom. Told her I was tired, that things were weird around here. She got quiet, then said something that froze my blood. She told me to stay away from the old reservoir outside town, the one that used to supply water to the base decades ago before it dried up. She said there'd been accidents there. People missing. Said one girl drowned and they never found her body. Just her car, headlights still on, door open. My mom whispered, "You stay away from that water, son." It remembers faces. Those words hit me. Because I'd heard them before, years ago, from my grandfather when I was just a kid. He used to fish near that same reservoir before they fenced it off. He said the water wasn't natural, that sometimes it reflected things that weren't there. I hadn't thought about that in years. That night, I couldn't sleep. The air felt heavy, the wind still. Around 2:17 a.m., the tapping started again. 3 sharp knocks. I sat up, grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and crept toward the window. The light caught something outside. A face, staring in. Pale, wet, eyes wide open. I stumbled back, tripping over the chair, dropping the phone. When I looked again, she was gone. The next morning, I packed a bag. Told myself I'd leave town for a few days, maybe stay with a friend in Amarillo. But when I got to my truck, I saw the handprints. Sticky and dark, smeared across the windshield, running down like melted wax. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up. For a few days, I tried to shake it off. I stayed with my friend Mark, told him I was dealing with stress from school. He laughed it off, said I needed sleep. But that night, I woke up to the sound of running water. I followed it into the bathroom. The tub was filling on its own, faucet turned full open. In the water's reflection, for half a second, I saw her face again, upside down, eyes open underwater, hair drifting like seaweed. I stumbled back, heart hammering. Mark came running in, but by then the water was still. I left before sunrise. Back in Lubbock, I tried to forget it. I moved to a new place closer to campus, a second-floor apartment. The tapping stopped. The handprints didn't come back. For a while, things were normal. I convinced myself I'd imagined most of it, that maybe I'd let old stories and lack of sleep twist my mind. Then one morning, I woke to the faint smell of wet dirt. I turned toward the window, handprints. Fresh, smaller than before. And just outside, near the edge of the glass, something moved. I told myself not to look. But curiosity can be cruel. I leaned forward, peered out, and for a heartbeat, I saw her standing on the roof of the building across from mine. Bare feet, wet dress, hair hanging over her shoulders. Her head tilted as if she was studying me. I blinked, and she was gone. From then on, things got worse. Every night, something new. The sound of water dripping from the ceiling, though the pipes were fine. Shadows bending wrong under the streetlight. I'd see her in reflections on the TV screen when it was off, in the stainless steel of my sink. Always the same pale face, the same expression, like she was waiting for me to remember something. One evening, I found a newspaper in the hallway. An old clipping had slipped out from between the pages. It was about a missing student from years ago. Female, drowned in the reservoir after her car veered off the road late at night. They never found her body. Her name was Laura Dean. I didn't know her, but something about her picture made my stomach twist. She looked like the woman I'd seen. That night, I couldn't stay inside. I drove out toward the edge of town, past the empty fields and the rusted water tower. The reservoir was still fenced off, but part of the wire was bent where people had cut through. The air smelled like rain, even though the sky was clear. I parked and walked closer. The water was still, perfectly still, reflecting the moon like glass. I stood there staring, thinking maybe if I faced it, it would stop. Maybe she'd leave me alone. I waited. Minutes passed. Then the surface rippled. Something pale rose up beneath the water. A face, hair drifting, eyes opening. I stumbled back, heart slamming. But I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. The thing beneath the water smiled, slow and knowing. And then, softly, I heard tapping again. Not from my trailer walls this time, but from under the water's surface. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back in the truck, engine roaring, gravel spraying behind me. In the rearview mirror, for one brief second, I saw headlights appear behind me again. Then they flickered out. By the time I got home, the sun was rising. I sat in the driveway for a long time, staring at the light coming up over the plains. I told myself it was over, that it had to be. But deep down, I knew better. This morning, when I opened my curtains, the handprints were back, high on the glass, wet, dripping. And faintly, almost too quiet to hear, came the sound of soft laughter carried through the wind. I always thought quiet was something you could find if you just drove far enough. My name is Daniel Holt, and most of my life I've been chasing silence that doesn't exist. Not peace exactly, because peace feels like something people say after they've already healed. I wanted real quiet, the kind that hums behind your heartbeat when there's nothing left to hear but wind. I was 37 when everything started unraveling. I'd worked maintenance at a small high school in Waco, Texas, fixing broken bleachers and cleaning locker rooms that smelled like sweat and detergent. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me time to think, to keep moving. My wife, Lena, left 3 years before that. She said I spent too much time wandering the back roads, disappearing into the woods near the Brazos River instead of sitting across from her at dinner. She said she couldn't compete with the quiet. She was right. After the divorce, I sold most of what I had, rented a single-room trailer outside of town, and started camping whenever I could. The woods around Waco aren't like the postcard kind. They're flat, tangled, all scrub oak and black river mud that sticks to your boots. But they had something the rest of the world didn't: distance. That September, when the heat had finally burned itself out and the nights were cool enough to see your breath, I packed my old truck with gear, a couple cans of chili, and my dog Ranger, a gray mutt that looked part wolf. My plan was simple: spend 5 days following the old service road that ran along the Brazos until it disappeared into the timber north of town. No phone, no people, no noise. The first 2 nights were perfect. Crickets so loud they sounded electric, a sky wide enough to swallow you whole. I cooked over the fire and read old field manuals by lantern light. But by the 3rd night, something in the air changed. I was sitting near the riverbank, close enough to hear the water slapping the stones, when I realized there was another rhythm under mine. Every step I took along the edge, I could hear another one, matching perfectly. When I stopped, it didn't. It went on, one extra step, soft and deliberate. I swung the light behind me. Nothing but reeds and the faint shimmer of the current. Ranger was stiff beside me, ears forward, a low growl rolling out of him like thunder through a tunnel. I told myself it was an echo, maybe some animal in the brush, but the sound didn't come again. By the time I reached my tent, the frogs had gone silent. The river hissed like static. The stillness was so complete it made my teeth ache. I didn't sleep much. Around 2:17 a.m., Ranger started whining. I opened my eyes and saw him staring at the thin wall of the tent. The fabric was trembling like something brushed it from outside. I reached for the pistol I kept beside me. The air smelled strange, like wet iron and wood smoke. The next morning, the air felt wrong, heavy, pressed down. I decided to head deeper into the trees, just to see what was ahead before turning back. The path narrowed into a corridor of cottonwood and tangled vines. After an hour, I found something wedged under a flat rock near a dead campfire. A note written in shaky pen: "It follows sounds. Don't stay by the water." My first thought was some local kids trying to scare campers. I almost laughed, but the longer I stared at those words, the less funny it felt. The paper was faded, edges torn from rain. It looked old. That night I camped on higher ground away from the river. I could still hear it faintly, that slow, constant rush far below. Ranger didn't move from the tent opening. He'd lift his head every few minutes and listen, body tense. I tried to focus on the fire, the way it popped and sent little ghosts of light up into the trees. Then I heard footsteps again, coming up the slope behind me. Not fast, not even trying to hide. Just steady, like whoever it was had every right to be there. I stood up slow, heart thudding. The firelight couldn't reach far, just enough to catch the shape of a man standing between two trees. His face was hidden under a hood, and something like bark or dried mud was smeared down his arms. I said, "Hey there," but it came out barely more than breath. He didn't answer. He tilted his head once, like he was curious, then stepped sideways into the dark. I didn't sleep that night either. By dawn, I'd made up my mind to hike out. The trail wound uphill and away from the water, cutting through mesquite and limestone. Every so often I'd stop and listen, just to make sure I was alone. By mid-afternoon, the heat came back hard. I could see the shimmer of highway through the trees. Highway 6, a good sign that civilization wasn't far. Then I saw something move at the bend in the trail. A person crouched low, wearing torn brown clothes streaked with red clay. I froze. Ranger growled, a deep rumble that made the hair on my arm stand up. The figure shifted, then darted behind a boulder faster than anything should move. I ran. I didn't even care which direction, just away from that slope. When I stopped, my lungs burning, I found myself on an old dirt road. A sign half buried in weeds read, "Do It Crossing Diner, 3 miles." The thought of people, lights, coffee, it pulled me forward. The diner was old, cracked neon barely glowing. A handful of locals sat scattered along the counter. The bell over the door jingled when I walked in, and every head turned. For a second, I thought maybe I looked worse than I realized, mud-streaked, eyes wild. I took a seat near the window, and the waitress, a woman with gray hair tied back tight, slid me a cup of coffee without asking. When she brought my plate, there was something folded underneath it, a piece of paper damp with grease. I pulled it free. 5 words written in a childlike scrawl, "Don't turn around, he's here." My throat went dry. I looked up, and everyone in the diner was staring. No one blinked. The air felt thick, the hum of the lights louder than it should have been. I turned anyway. The window behind me was black with night, but for a split second I saw a reflection that wasn't mine. A pale face with mud-smeared eyes and a mouth too wide pressed close to the glass. Then it was gone. I bolted outside. The parking lot was empty except for my truck and the faint whisper of wind through the trees. I got in, started the engine, and peeled out onto the road. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The highway stretched empty ahead, miles of nothing but dark fences and cornfields flashing in the headlights. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone sitting in the back seat. The further I drove, the heavier the night seemed to get, like it was pressing down on the truck. Somewhere near Highway 6's bend by the river bridge, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road, just standing there, barefoot, face turned toward me. I slammed the brakes, tires screaming. The headlights washed over him for half a second, and then nothing. He was gone. Ranger barked like he'd gone mad. I floored the gas and didn't slow down until I hit the lights of town. For days after, I couldn't stop hearing the footsteps. Even at work, sweeping the empty gym, I'd hear one step too many echo behind mine. I told myself it was stress, sleep deprivation. But one evening, as the sun dipped behind the water tower, I walked down to the Brazos again. The air smelled just like it had that night, iron and wood smoke. I stood on the bank, listening, nothing but the river. I almost convinced myself it was over. Then I heard it, that second rhythm, perfect, matching mine. I stopped, and it didn't. One step, 2, closer. I turned, heart hammering, and saw the faint outline of a man standing just inside the tree line, head tilted like he was trying to remember something. I whispered, "What do you want?" But the wind swallowed my voice. Now, months later, I still dream of that night. Sometimes when I drive past the diner on my way home, I swear I see someone sitting in the booth by the window, face turned toward the road. Other nights, when the wind drags across the roof of my trailer, Ranger lifts his head and growls low, and I hear it again. Those footsteps, just outside, keeping time with my heartbeat, waiting for me to stop. I still remember that November night like something etched deep into my bones, like a scar that never faded no matter how much time passed. Back then, my wife and I were living in a small rental house near the quiet edges of Galveston, Texas. We were both in our early 30s, still chasing the kind of peace you think you'll find by the sea. She worked as a part-time artist, painting ocean scenes that never quite looked like the ocean, and I was repairing boat engines for a living, running contracts for local fishermen who always paid in cash and beer. On weekends, when the weather behaved, we'd drive along the coast hunting for empty beaches to surf. It wasn't about the waves, it was about the quiet, the endless hush of the Gulf, and the feeling that the rest of the world was far away. That weekend, though, the water didn't feel calm. It felt sick. The air was too still, and the gulls had vanished from the sky. The forecast had called for messy conditions farther out on the Gulf, strong winds and churning tides, so we decided to try a smaller place a man once told me about, a hidden spot beyond the old seawall where no tourists went. Locals called it Hollow Shore. We packed up our old blue SUV, threw in 2 surfboards, a camp stove, sleeping bags, and a cooler full of leftovers. The plan was simple: drive out in the evening, park by the dunes, sleep in the car, and catch the sunrise waves. The sky was bruised purple when we left, around 7:45 p.m., the air carrying that thick salt smell that clings to your hair and clothes. The road curved through long stretches of dark marsh, the kind of place where fog forms out of nowhere. When we passed the last gas station, our phones dropped signal completely. She smiled at me through the dim glow of the dashboard, saying softly, "No calls, no work, just the ocean and us." I laughed, agreeing. That was the point. We reached Hollow Shore a little after 9. The dirt road wound down toward the beach, hidden behind tall grass and half-dead pines. There were only 2 other vehicles parked there, an old camper van and a faded green truck. Between them, a campfire burned low, flickering orange against the fog. I killed the engine, exhaling, so we weren't completely alone. We ate ramen by the car, our breath fogging in the cold. Somewhere near the fire, 2 men were laughing. They looked like locals, fishermen maybe, their laughter rolling over the sound of the waves. Everything felt calm then, almost peaceful. Until the man walked out of the dark. It was close to 10 when I saw him. He came down the road alone, moving with the kind of slow, casual pace that didn't fit the freezing air. He wore a flannel shirt, torn jeans, and a dirty baseball cap. No flashlight, no gear, nothing. He just strolled as if he belonged there. The men by the fire called out to him, and he joined them. I didn't think much of it. By 11, we crawled into the SUV, folded down the seats, and slipped into our sleeping bags. The air outside had gone colder, heavy with mist. At one point, I woke up maybe around 1:30 a.m. to the need to pee. When I opened the door, a shiver crawled through me. The fire was still burning, but the van and the truck were gone. Just gone. No tire marks, no lights, nothing. The only sound left was the tide. I muttered something about them leaving early and shut the door. We fell back asleep. Then came the tapping. It must have been around 2:12 a.m. The sound was soft at first, like something brushing the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, eyes snapping open. My wife stirred beside me. "You hear that?" I whispered. She nodded, eyes wide in the dim light. The sound came again, slower this time, deliberate. 3 knocks, tap, tap, tap. I tried to convince myself it was just pine needles or maybe sand hitting the car, but the rhythm was too human, too careful. Silence followed, stretching too long. I reached for my flashlight, turning it toward the window. Nothing. Just fog swirling around the glass, thick and gray. I slipped out of the car, breath steaming in the air, heart pounding hard enough to hurt. "Stay here," I whispered. She clutched my arm. "Don't leave me." So we both stepped out, lights trembling in our hands. The night was thick, the beach swallowed in darkness, the horizon gone. "Hello," I called out. Nothing, only the sea. Then I saw them. Faint headlights up the road, just sitting there on the highway above the turnout, not moving. The fog made them look like eyes staring down at us. "Let's pack up," I said. Now. We threw everything into the back, the sound of zippers and metal clanging far too loud in that silence. The car felt smaller than ever as I turned the key. Our headlights sliced through the mist, and that's when I saw it clearly. A black SUV idling near the exit, no plates visible, engine rumbling low. "Keep driving," my wife whispered, voice shaking. "Don't stop." We rolled past slowly. The SUV didn't move. The windows were tinted, too dark to see through. Just as we reached the curve, its lights blazed on full. I hit the gas, gravel spraying behind us. The road twisted along the cliffs, the fog cutting visibility down to nothing. When I checked the mirror, the SUV was right behind us, its lights low now but closing fast. "Are they following us?" she asked, panic rising. I didn't answer. Seconds later, the brights came on again, flooding the car with white light. My wife gasped, clutching the seat. The SUV swerved closer, too close, then backed off, then surged again. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, like it was playing with us. "Why are they doing this?" she cried. I didn't know. Maybe they thought we were someone else, but I didn't believe that. The chase went on forever. My hands were slick on the wheel, the fog wrapping everything in white. Then I saw a narrow dirt path, half hidden behind the brush, maybe an old service road. "Hang on," I said, slamming the brakes and cutting the lights. We veered off and rolled to a stop behind the trees. The SUV roared past, never slowing. We sat there, breathing hard, hands shaking. My wife pressed her face into her palms. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. I didn't answer. We waited 15 minutes before turning back toward town. By the time we reached the first lights of Galveston, dawn was bleeding through the fog. We pulled into a 24-hour gas station, parked under the buzzing lights, and just sat there. Her hands trembled so badly she couldn't hold her coffee. "If we hadn't seen that road," she murmured. I didn't reply. I just stared at the mist outside the windshield, thinking about the tapping on the glass, thinking about that SUV waiting up there in the dark. We never went back to Hollow Shore. Weeks later, after I thought I'd shaken it off, something strange started happening at the beach house we rented. It was a creaky old place near the seawall, built sometime in the 1920s, full of uneven floors and salt-rotted windows. The landlord said people always complained about the wind, said it sounded like footsteps on the porch. The first time I heard it, I thought he was right. It was 2:12 a.m., and the sound came from the hallway outside our room, slow, dragging steps, like bare feet moving through sand. The floorboards creaked with each step, and with every creak, I swear I heard grains of sand falling onto the floorboards. I sat up, staring at the door, waiting for the steps to stop. They didn't. They circled the bed once, then faded into the walls. I told myself it was the wind again. But it happened the next night, and the next. Always 2:12 a.m. Always those same dragging steps, leaving behind the faint sound of sand falling, like the beach itself was trying to crawl inside. My wife stopped sleeping after that. One evening, I walked the seawall alone, trying to clear my head. The wind was low, the sea restless under the moonlight. Somewhere behind me, I heard crying. A man's voice, broken, echoing through the mist. When I turned, it stopped, then shifted. Suddenly, the crying was right beside my left ear. I spun around, heart slamming, but there was no one, just the ocean. By the time I made it back to the house, my nerves were wrecked. She was sitting up in bed, shaking. Her eyes were on the floor. I followed her gaze and froze. Wet footprints led from the doorway to our bed. Each one glistened dark against the carpet. But our entire floor was carpeted. There was no water source, no sand, nothing that could have left those marks. That night, the steps came again, louder than ever, circling the room until they stopped right beside my side of the bed. I didn't breathe. When I woke, the window was open, and there was sand on the sill. I called the landlord the next morning, told him something was wrong with the place. He just sighed, said every tenant complained about that. Said the house used to belong to a fisherman who vanished after a storm in 1956. They never found his body, but his boots had washed up right where Hollow Shore used to be before the tide swallowed it. That night, I stayed up waiting. I watched the clock crawl past 2:12 a.m. When the steps came again, I whispered into the dark, "What do you want?" The steps paused, and for a moment, the silence was so heavy it hurt my ears. Then, from the edge of the bed, a voice so low it felt like breath against my neck said, "Do you remember me yet?" I turned on the flashlight, but there was nothing. Just a window wide open again, curtains moving in the wind, and on the floor, another set of wet footprints leading straight out the door. We moved out 2 days later. Even now, years later, every time we drive down the seawall at night, I catch myself looking in the mirror, half expecting to see headlights behind us, or sand spilling from the ceiling, or to hear those dragging steps start again right at 2:12 a.m.